Hello and happy Halloween. I'm Professor McCoy. Today I want to watch with you guys, or at least parts of, the Charlie Brown special. It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. I absolutely adore this special, and I've talked about it before in other lectures. In fact, you'll find linked in the description my lecture on Reformed epistemology, which addresses this and some of the religious, epistemological, and theological and philosophical topics that are surprisingly found within. And and you'll also find I will link to an archive version of this special. So if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while, please go watch it there rather than just trying to rely on this, because I'm not going to be showing the whole thing, both for copyright reasons and because simply due to length. I'm going to be pausing and commentating and that sort of thing, and you'll get those parts. So in any case, I'm looking forward to what we can draw from this from a philosophical perspective. I'm going to be looking at it primarily in terms of epistemology, because that is where I'm used to using this actually for class and teaching this is in the context of religious epistemology or epistemology of religion. So talking about questions of how and when are we justified in believing in things, just like we have to ask if Linus is justified in believing in the Great Pumpkin or not, and why, and why exactly is he justified or is he not justified, and then what leads him to believe these things, and is he believing in good faith, and all sorts of questions like this that are related to epistemology of religion, to Reformed epistemology in particular, which is one of the topics of my philosophy of religion class. That, again, like I said, you'll find a lecture on that below. And so, with that, I'm going to start this, and we'll find me skipping ahead gradually and going through and commentating on the things there are to comment upon, and hopefully this is both entertaining, educational, and a nice little Halloween special, whether you're watching this on Halloween or watching it some other time later. All right, let's get going.
Oh, you didn't tell me you were gonna kill it. Ah!
I just remembered today, now showing this to my class again, how long the introduction to this special was, and it's not even over yet. It's already been, as you can see down there, 3 full minutes, and there's another minute or so of introduction. So, now, don't get me wrong, it's delightful, it's wonderful, it's adorable, but man, is it long! And that took up class time, man. Anyway, let's get to the good part, shall we? Notice this is the original air version. This is the version that aired on I think CBS in the 1960s, and so it has the in place ads, and oh god, I love it. I don't know. This is just everything about this is just so delightfully nostalgic. Anyway, let's keep going. Again, still in the introduction, so let's get ahead. Let's get to the good part. Again.
Say, Charlie Brown, I've got a football. How about practicing a few place kicks? I'll hold the ball, and you come running and kick it.
Oh, brother. I guess if you have a signed document in your possession, you can't go wrong.
We see it. I mean, already this was relatively early in Peanuts' run. We see already the extreme lengths that Lucy has to go to trick Charlie Brown into trying to kick the football. This is already an old trope that is getting that's having to have variations put on it, and also, well, we know there's going to be a trick because there's always a trick. It's Lucy, of course. There's going to be, but she's using more and more sophisticated means and methods to deceive him without actually lying, and this is actually a great case of that, where she's trying to trick Charlie Brown instead of just explicitly lying, which is one of those distinctions that ethicists especially talk about all the time, like doing telling half truths and withholding information and stuff like that instead of actually lying, especially ethicists, especially like Thomistic ethicists. and Kantians who think that it's always wrong to lie, but you can deceive somebody if you are technically telling the truth. And Lucy's technically telling the truth here, and we'll see. And then there's more to this. So let's have a look, and then we'll see where this goes.
This year, I'm really gonna kick that football.
Peculiar thing about this document, it was never notarized.
So on that note, we see an example of one of the epistemological points that I was making, and also the deception. Lucy is technically not lying because she didn't have the document notarized. It wasn't, in other words, it was not it didn't quite qualify as a solemn promise or a solemn oath. It was just a throwaway document in this case. And so she's not technically lying, but she's still definitely deceiving Charlie Brown. Now the other part of this is that Charlie Brown got the belief that Lucy was actually going to hold the football in place for once from the signed document that she gave him. But the fact that the document wasn't notarized, or further, I guess, maybe we should even say the fact that Lucy would expect such a document to need notarization, these constitute what Reformed epistemologists call a defeater. And this is really just counter evidence to a claim, which would give you reason to doubt it if you knew about it. Now, Reformed epistemologists, as I've talked about in the other lecture, they think that the non-presence or the lack of a defeater, that is an additional fact that if you knew about it, it would cause you to doubt the belief in question, is part of what it means for a belief to have warrant, to have epistemic warrant, particularly for it to be a properly basic belief that is a non-inferential or intuitive belief without this kind of a defeater. And so a defeater like this whether it turns out to be true or not, constitutes a reason for questioning your belief and then a reason to investigate further. Because, I mean, in an example like this, you may have a signed document that's not notarized, and it might still be a reason for thinking that what's said on the document is going to be, carried out. Maybe we have signed documents, we sign documents, and we have signed documents, and we rely on them. We even rely on, say, handshake agreements all the time that aren't notarized, right? And so the requirement of a notary for this particular case is a kind of idiosyncrasy of Lucy's, specifically in order to deceive Charlie Brown into trying to kick the football and then falling on his back, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say kill himself on YouTube, despite Charlie Brown saying it. Anyway, but yeah, it's one of those where if he had known that she expected notarization and it wasn't notarized, then that would have given him a reason to doubt that she's going to hold the football still, even if she wound up doing it because she had signed the document, etc., or because she wanted to earn his trust, maybe for doing it again later, or who knows, might have had whatever reason. But if he had known that she expected the document to be notarized and it wasn't, that would have given him a reason to question further and a reason to doubt. That's the key, and that's the point that epistemologists would point out about this situation. All right, let's get into the slightly more religious aspects next, I think.
Dear Great Pumpkin,
You must be crazy. When are you going to stop believing in something that isn't true?
when
You'll notice that begs the question. Specifically, that begs the question about it not being true. If the question at hand is whether the Great Pumpkin exists or not, which it seems to be, right? That's what Charlie Brown is arguing with Linus about. What all the kids are arguing with Linus about is trying to convince him that the Great Pumpkin doesn't exist. You're not going to convince him of that by saying, well, why are you believing in something that isn't true? Because he thinks it is true, right? He thinks that the Great Pumpkin does exist, and it is real, and that it will deliver presents to all the good children, and will rise out of the most sincere, and the what's the other criterion? I know the ultimate criterion is the most sincere pumpkin patch, right? So that the great pumpkin will come. It's real. He believes that. So telling him to stop believing things that aren't real isn't going to convince him to stop believing in the great pumpkin, because obviously he believes in it, therefore he believes that it's real. This kind of approach is entirely useless in convincing somebody to abandon their belief, because it's begging the question as to the falsity of the belief at hand. So you're not going to actually convince anybody by assuming that their belief is false in order to try and prove to them that the belief is false. Anyway, keep going.
You must be crazy. When are you going to stop believing in something that isn't true?
When you stop believing in that fellow with the red suit and the white beard who goes ho, ho, ho.
We are obviously separated by denominational differences.
Now, to quote Jonathan Peugeot, obviously Santa Claus exists. For different reasons, of course, and in a fundamentally different way than we might think, and probably in a fundamentally different way than the Great Pumpkin does. Which, again, see my video on the subject. I'll throw that in the description as well as Jonathan Peugeot's. But I love the little jab at denominational differences there that they're comparing their particular beliefs about mythological creatures, magical entities, let's say, maybe that's a better description, to something like religious difference. And you'll find this as a sort of atheist criticism that belief in God is like a belief in Santa Claus or something like that. And of course, anybody who has a sophisticated understanding of either knows that they are fundamentally different kinds of beliefs about fundamentally different kinds of things. But the analogy works that there are two people here, two kids in this case, who believe in two different things and believe in them in, presumably for both of them, in something like a properly basic sort of way. But they don't have sophisticated scientific, observational, or even philosophical arguments for either the Great Pumpkin or Santa Claus, and yet each of them believes. And something else worth noting here, and this is something that happens throughout the whole the whole special, is you find people saying to Linus, basically explaining to him that they don't believe in the Great Pumpkin. They know otherwise. Right? It's worth noting, we were talking about defeaters before, that alone is not a defeater for a belief. It's really important to note this, that just because somebody thinks otherwise is not a good reason to doubt a belief that you have a solid reason for holding. Right? If you have a good reason to believe something, that just because somebody else thinks differently shouldn't give you a reason to doubt it. Somebody presenting you with a reason to doubt your reasons for believing, that's the only thing that really would present you with a reason for doubting. Now, for example, you presumably, looking at the screen in front of you, believe that my shirt here is red, right? Now, if I were to just say, I'm wearing a pink shirt right now, that doesn't give you a good reason to doubt that I'm wearing a red shirt, because you can see it. You can see it right in front of you, and that's a very good reason to believe that the shirt is red. Now, if I were to instead say that I messed with the filters to change the color grading, maybe as a way of like avoiding copyright or something like that, and I have darkened the colors, I've darkened the reds, the red hues, which is also why why this is sort of pinkish instead of whitish, maybe something like that. And because I've darkened the hues, my pink shirt looks red to you. Now, what that would constitute a defeater, because then what I've done is I've given you a reason to doubt your immediate sense perception. I haven't just said that there is somebody who disagrees with your sense perception, because your sense perception is very immediate and it's typically very reliable. Another good example of this, borrowed from Trent Horn, at least that's where I borrow it from, is suppose that you didn't kill someone. Usually something simple and straightforward, easy to suppose. But that you can't prove it. You don't have an alibi, say. And so someone else, due to circumstantial evidence or something, does believe that you killed somebody. just because you can't prove it, and you don't have an alibi, you don't have a verified alibi, shouldn't, and because somebody else believes that you did kill somebody, that shouldn't give you any reason to doubt the fact that you didn't kill anybody, because you know you didn't. You remember not doing it. And that's as simple as it needs to get. And so, bringing this into the realm of religion and the epistemology of religion, the very fact that people think differently about God or about religion, or there are people who don't believe in God or hold to a different religion than you do or than I do, shouldn't be a reason for either of us to question our religious beliefs. Because our religious beliefs come to us for other reasons, whether that's evidential, whether that's philosophical, whether that's metaphysical, whether that's immediate, whether that's a sort of properly basic. Regardless, it doesn't matter. The fact that other people think differently shouldn't really affect that. There's no reason for it to affect that, because it doesn't actually undermine your reasons for believing, unless your reason for believing is because, well, I guess that's what everybody thinks, which usually isn't most people's reason for believing in religion. But if it is, it's, let's be honest, it's not a great one. Keep going.
You must get discouraged because more people believe in Santa Claus than in you. Well, let's face it, Santa Claus has had more publicity. But being number 2, perhaps you try harder.
I absolutely love how utterly cruel this whole special is, especially to Linus, but just it also Charlie Brown too, but just in general. This was very you couldn't get away with this today.
There are 3 things that I've learned never to discuss with people: religion, politics, and the great pumpkin.
Another one of those great little comparisons to religious topics, but this time it's much more it's separated, and so it's more explicit. And now I'll also say, I've said this before too, and other lectures as well, that attitude is, I think, really damaging to our ability to take ourselves and each other seriously with respect to politics and religion. And so we're sort of learned this, I guess, for the last at least 60 years, because this was about 60 years ago, give or take, almost 60 years ago, I guess. We all kind of learned not to talk about politics or religion in polite company or at the dinner table or at Thanksgiving, God forbid at Thanksgiving. But the reason we learn that is because it's something that we see as a realm of what we would properly call mere preference, but what we're probably more apt to call mere opinion. And so it's an agree to disagree kind of subject. Both of them are. And so the assumption is there's no real fact of the matter, or at least there's no way of determining the facts of the matter in polite company, which is absurd, right? That's a terrible assumption to make about religion or about politics, because both of these are very, very important things that we should be able to come to rational conclusions about and come to determinations about, and to discuss them like mature adults and actually figure out what we think, what we believe, why we believe it, and talk to each other about it, take each other's views seriously. And I mean, we can even dig into this example in particular, that a kind of avoidance of the subject of religion is partially what leads to absurd and obviously false religious beliefs. Things like the Great Pumpkin. Because people don't take it seriously, right? They don't take their own views seriously, and they don't take each other's views seriously to the extent that they were willing to argue about them rationally and intellectually and even politely. Right? We're more likely to just sort of yell at each other, shun each other, and block each other on social media than we are to actually have a polite adult conversation about politics or religion. And it's because we've trained ourselves for, like, I don't know, two, three generations at least to not talk about it, when I think we should be.
P.S. If you really are a fake, don't tell me. I don't want to know.
That's crucially important. That is crucially important to the entire point of what I want to talk about here, because what he is doing here, by saying, if you really are fake, don't tell me, I don't want to know. He's saying that he doesn't want to know the truth. He fundamentally wants to avoid learning the truth if the truth doesn't conform to his expectations and desires. He is what we call this in philosophy, he's believing in bad faith, or he's acting in bad faith. He is believing on the basis of something other than the normativity of truth. That is, he is choosing to believe something that he intentionally is refusing to discover whether it's true or not. In other words, he's choosing to believe for a reason other than the truth. And so, because of this, we see also that he is preparing himself sort of psychologically to reject any potential defeater that might arise, rather than reconcile it, examine it, deal with it in some rational way. He's basically just saying, I don't want to hear about any potential defeaters from my view. I'm just going to ignore them. So what he's saying here is, one, he's acting in bad faith. Two, he's not being epistemically responsible, in the sense that he's not believing in a properly basic way. He's not believing in a properly evidential way. He's not believing in even in a pragmatic way. If we're coming for like pragmatism, like somebody like William James or Blaise Pascal, even in a case like that, this isn't the kind of thing that even those folks would advocate for, because it's intentionally ignoring facts of the matter. And that's crucial to seeing why Linus is believing irrationally throughout this process.
What are you doing, Linus? I'd rather not say. You might laugh. Oh, I never laugh at you, Linus.
We see here in this little exchange, again, they're not treating the issue seriously, right? She's not treating his ideas as if they're ideas. She's just treating his ideas, in this case about the Great Pumpkin, like they're character traits, and that she likes his character traits. That's all. And I think, again, that's a symptom of what I was talking about before, this inability to talk about politics and religion in a civilized, intellectual manner.
What's going on here? What are you trying to do to my little sister?
Recruit her into a cult.
There were two lists, Charlie Brown. One to invite and one not to invite. You must have been put on the wrong list.
There's Lucy being needlessly cruel again, but also just sort of another instance of Charlie Brown, like, something fundamental about his character is he never gets a good deal of anything, and he's always treated like this. By everybody, not just the other kids, but the adults too. And there's more of that. There's more of that to come, and I love it. It's horrible, but it's hilarious. Kind of adorable too. It's quaint. It's quaint cruelty, if there can be such a thing.
A person should always choose a costume which is in direct contrast to her own personality.
First of all, the irony is just really funny, because, obviously, the joke is that she's basically a witch in real life, or acts like one, so to speak. And so there is absolutely no contrast to her actual personality. But I think that principle is actually a decently good one. I've talked as well about, in another lecture, on inversion festivals. And really the only inversion festival that we have left as a culture is Halloween. We kind of had Mardi Gras, but Mardi Gras has lost a lot of its edge. Since the world has already sort of turned itself upside down in the last half decade or so. And so our only real inversion festival left is Halloween. And it certainly was the wildly popular inversion festival in American culture in the 60s when this was airing. And so the purpose of an inversion festival is to let out in a restrained, civilized sort of way the darker sides of our society, or the parts of our world which are usually restrained to the margins, constrained to the margins, kept away from the center of society. And so you are inverting not only society but yourself. So you are ordinarily a normal a kid, say, in a case like this, when you're a normal kid, you are obedient to adults. You do what you're supposed to do. You don't talk to strangers. You're a child rather than a monster. Right? And on Halloween, all of that gets inverted. You go to every stranger's house. You threaten them, trick or treat. Give us a treat, or we will play a trick on you. And you dress up as a monster. You dress up as something horrible and monstrous when you, a child, are in fact small and innocent. And it's a total inversion of everything. And it's the day that, maybe one of several days, but let's just say the day, right, as part of the sort of liturgy of our world, where everything can turn on its head, and so that upside downness, that repressed, that otherwise what would be repressed chaos, can be set free in a predictable way, in a non-dangerous sort of way. And so the whole, like, you should choose a costume that's in direct contrast to your actual personality is actually a really good, insightful point about Halloween. Yeah, I like that.
Every year, Linus misses tricks or treats.
Every year. That tells us something else here. That tells us that Linus has not just missed this now. Like, this isn't the first time he's done this, and the Great Pumpkin didn't show up. He does this every year. Now, I mean, presumably these kids aren't that old, right? I don't know. Linus is probably, what, 7 or 8? Probably 6 or 7. Actually, I would guess 6 or 7. And so he can't realistically have been doing this for more than 2 or 3 years. But in any case, if he has been doing this for even if this is just the second time he's done it, even if he just did this last year, then that indicates that he should be aware of the defeater, that the Great Pumpkin didn't show up when he expected it to. And he should have had to reform, or modify, or doubt, or reconsider, or analyze more deeply his belief in the Great Pumpkin, and he hasn't done so. He very clearly has not analyzed it any deeper. Maybe there's a minor exception to this. Maybe he's come up with something like a caveat or an out. And that's the whole sincerity, the sincerity requirement that I guess we'll talk about more when he talks about that. But it seems like he should be very much aware of the defeaters for his belief here, but he has refused to acknowledge them. And that's just believing irresponsibly, as we were saying before.
I had a little trouble with the scissors.
He's the Holy Ghost. That's not the joke that they make, but it's a good one anyway. Anyway, moving on. The British salute there. The palm out on the forehead, out and then snap with the little quiver. It's very traditional and very English, or British, I suppose. I know this because I was in a Scottish marching band in high school. Our hometown was very Scottish, and we all wore kilts. We had our drum majors had the traditional Scottish maces, and we did the drum major salute this way rather than the traditional American way, which is palm down. And it was a weird thing, and a lot of, like, when we would sort of hang out with other bands, they were like, "What the heck are you doing?" But it fits here really, really well with Snoopy and the Red Baron, the World War I flying Yanks being presumably a British character, that British character that the American character, is playing as. It's a little bit meta, but it fits. It fits well. It's a cool little historical bit. I like that. I like that little touch.
I thought little girls always believed everything that was told to them. I thought little girls were innocent and trusting. Welcome to the 20th century.
Feminism. Oh gosh, no, that's dumb. It's funny though. I don't know. I think that's an an indication that, again, half a century ago, there was still this change in expectations, or at least a perceived change in expectations, because you could see somebody saying that now, like, welcome to the 21st century. Girls don't just do what they're told, or don't just believe what they're told, or whatever like that. You could hear somebody say that about the 20th century in like the current year in 2022 as of this recording, and it would be perfectly reasonable. It would fit right in. And yet this 1966, I think. Man, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I'll tell you what.
Each year, the great pumpkin rises out of the pumpkin patch that he thinks is the most sincere. He's got to pick this one. He's got to. I don't see how a pumpkin patch can be more sincere than this one. You can look all around and there's not a sign of hypocrisy.
There's the out. There's at least a potential way out that he has. And presumably, this is the basis. This is based on a change that he made from his belief last year, which is that last year, maybe the year before, that the Great Pumpkin will rise out of the pumpkin patch in general. But this belief might be a sort of change, or a sort of reform, or a sort of adaptation of the previous belief in a previous belief he might have had in the Great Pumpkin. Because it didn't show up, he has to sort of reconcile that in his mind, has to come up with a reason for why the Great Pumpkin didn't show up. And maybe it's because of this requirement for sincerity. Maybe there was some kind of hypocrisy in the pumpkin patch. Whatever that could possibly mean. I have no idea, but maybe that's what happened. Maybe he blames his lack of faith. Maybe he blames something about the pumpkin patch itself. And so he gets out of having to reconcile with a defeater by coming up with a justification for it, or maybe a rationalization for it. Now, that's, of course, not... It's an ad hoc rationalization. There doesn't seem to be anything about the Great Pumpkin in general. There doesn't seem to be anything about the sincerity of a pumpkin patch that map onto one another. And so this seems to be just sort of arbitrary or ad hoc rationalization. And so it's not strictly reasonable. It's not a reasonable development of the idea in response to genuinely dealing with a challenge. It's, again, I think, a sign of operating in bad faith here. Which, to be fair, it's hard to blame him. He's a small child, but still, I think we can use this adequately as an example for real-world epistemology.
I got 5 pieces of candy. I got a chocolate bar. I got a quarter.
I got a rock.
Gee, I got a candy bar. Boy, I got 3 cookies. Hey, I got a package of gum.
I got a rock.
I got a popcorn ball. I got a fudge bar.
I got a pack of gum.
I got a rock.
And so, a couple of things about this. This is that almost hilarious, quaint cruelty that we see. That Charlie Brown never gets his way at all. He gets a rock instead of candy at each time. And we also see the rule of 3 in comedy. If you want a joke to land well, you can repeat it up to 3 times, and twice can miss the mark. The third time is when it's because when you say it once, it's funny. The first time he gets a rock, funny. The second time, it's like, oh, that again, okay. And then you're like, okay, well, you were done. But then the third time, sort of subconsciously, you're not expecting it a third time because it's come up twice. And it's like, oh, well, I guess you're expecting it again after the first time, and the second time shows up, and then before the third time comes up, subconsciously you're like, okay, we're done now. And so the third time comes up, and then it sort of tumbles down all of the funny that's been stored up by the joke. At least that's the theory. And this doesn't always work for everything, but I think it certainly does here. Anyway, I'm no expert on comedy, no real expert on comedy, but I know some little bits of comedic theory, if you want to call it that. And this is certainly one of them, and it's certainly well utilized here. And so is the sort of the contrasted cruelty between all the other kids getting their various sweets and treats, and Charlie Brown getting rocks.
His mission is to find the Red Baron and shoot him down.
So this is the Snoopy and the Red Baron plot, which I actually kind of have to say, if it's gonna fit anywhere in a Peanuts special, it'd be here. It'd be the Halloween special because he's dressed up as the Flying Ace. Fine, but also it really, I think, and this is really noticeable when I'm like watching this in class and trying to focus on the Great Pumpkin plot. I think it harms the pacing of the special a lot. Like the long digressions into the World War I Flying Ace aspect, the Snoopy versus the Red Baron subplot, the sort of C plot. A lot of it really hurts the pacing of the special overall because there's these long segments which are completely free of dialogue. It's only Snoopy, and they're unrelated to everything else going on in the episode. Now, later on, they wind up tying things together. I'll try and pause and mention that as well. But yeah, I do think that it kind of hurts the pacing of the special. They had to put it somewhere because it's Snoopy and the Red Baron. You can't not. And then why not a Halloween episode? But it's not always great. No, it's great on its own. It's great on its own, but it doesn't fit well with everything. I don't think it fits well with the rest of the episode. Anyway. It's so dark for a kid's cartoon. Like, and I know it's like it's the Snoopy part. So why would this be the him being down behind enemy lines in the trenches of France? I always thought this was again, it's oddly out of place. It's great. Like I actually really like this part, but I like this part on its own. It's like I said, it's kind of weird wedged in here with the rest of the Great Pumpkin.
Has the Great Pumpkin been by?
Kids are just mean, like horribly mean. Oh gosh. Again, like this isn't the. I think that this is natural child interaction, like really, but we have, as a culture, tried so hard to squeeze this kind of behavior out of kids, and a lot of it's done through media. A lot of it is done through media that we've gone so far into the anti-bullying kind of thing that we don't see kids acting really like kids in most media, and so kids have weird examples to try and follow. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad. We should portray good examples for our kids to learn from, like obviously. I don't know how great of an example this is, but then again, it's shown as a kind of as unsympathetic. This is the kind of thing that happens, but it's not something that is portrayed as anything like a good thing. But in any case, it's realistic. It's real. It's real. It's the kind of thing that kids are like this to each other, and we've tried as a society since then. Since then, I say since I was a kid, really, to just kind of squish this kind of behavior out of children entirely. I think that it's that more than anything, it's pressing it down, it's suppressing it, and we've also done a hell of a job getting rid of subversion or inversion festivals, like Halloween for that matter, from our society, and so there is no outlet for that sort of thing, and so it can turn dark in a lot of ways. Anyway, I think that the kind of this kind of childhood banter, cruel as it might be, I mean, again, it's quaintly cruel. It's not like they're taking the rocks from Charlie Brown's bag and throwing them at each other or something. No, they're just making fun of Linus for believing something silly, which, I mean, he believes something silly. He really does, and he's choosing to defy everyone else's norms. And I mean, to be fair, there's something respectable about that. That he thinks something is true, even if he doesn't have a good reason for thinking it. That part's a problem. But again, if he had a good reason for thinking it, then this would be somewhat admirable. Then again, it's another thing that I think our culture is missing is a kind of pressure towards normativity. recently had a video about the sort of inversion of cultural norms, and the removal and the replacement of the normative with the non-normative, and the normatization of the abnormal. Big words, big talk. Watch the video. But I think that this kind of behavior is the alternative. There's bad parts of that. Hurts people's feelings. It can genuinely lead kids towards overconformity, maybe. And if there is this social pressure to conform, there isn't so much anymore. But at the same time, social pressure to conform is not always a bad thing. Because either you should conform because your idea is crazy, like the Great Pumpkin, or you shouldn't conform and you develop the courage to push back that I think even a lot of adults today don't have. I think a lot of adults today are pushovers, and I mean we learned that during during the pandemic response and things like that. We learned that a lot of adults are just pushovers and will conform as soon as pressure is applied. And it's because they never had social pressure applied to them, young adults at least, people my age and younger, never had social pressure applied to them like this, and so they never had pressure to conform. And so as soon as that pressure shows up, they just buckle to it. And I think that now the converse can be true. If you're used to buckling to pressure, if you're used to having pressure applied to you, social pressure, then that can train you to just conform. And so there's a danger of the opposite as well, to be fair. But I do think that that having social pressure, like we see here, like this is a window back 50, 60 years. And I think this is a better way of encouraging social development.
Linus knows what he's talking about. Linus knows what he's doing. Right, where is he?
Oh gosh. It's the she's at the margin in a sense. Lucy or Sally, that's it. She's fighting inwards and fighting outwards. In other words, she's defending Linus from all the other kids, because she is sort of standing in between him and them. And so she's defending him against them, but then she turns around and says, "Hey, what gives?" She attacks him in her own way. And that's what happens when you are the sort of the middle ground, say. A good analogy is the sort of watcher on the wall. Right? So, I mean, if we wanted to go really philosophical with it, Plato's auxiliaries, the soldiery, the guardians, small g, lowercase guardians of the ideal city, are fundamentally both hostile to outsiders. They defend the city from incursions, from outside dangers, but then they also will enforce the will of the rulers upon people. And so they're facing in, they're facing out. Like Sally, right, is defending Linus from outside threats, but then also enforces upon him certainty, because she's holding him responsible, because she's defending him. She's defending him, and so that there's something there she sees to defend, but she needs to make sure there's something there to defend, something serious, something real. And I mean, it turns out not to be, and she gets disappointed, obviously. But I like this dynamic. It's a symbolically it's great, and even practically it's great. We see this kind of thing all the time. That the same person who is willing to defend somebody is also going to harshly criticize them because they're defending them, because they actually have a concern for what's right here, what's right both on the inside and then also against the outside.
He'll be here.
I hope so. I have my reputation to think of, you know. And you think what a fun we're missing.
She has a reputation to think of. I just compared her to Plato's auxiliaries. The auxiliaries are primarily, first and foremost, concerned with honor, which is just another word for reputation. So I hadn't noticed that connection before, but there it is. There's something there. There's something to it. Anyway, maybe not. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I think there's at least potentially something interesting there. Question, actually. So World War One, France during World War One in the teens, were they using metric already? Is that kind of I kind of got the impression that the metric system came up like alongside the League of Nations, like following after the First World War. Actually, what am I talking about? I can just check this. What am I doing? I'm gonna check. Did France use the metric system in here better? When did France switch to metric? Whoa! Okay, so cool. France started using the metric system in 1795. I had no idea. So apparently, France is credited with originating the metric system, which actually, you know what? Actually, that makes a lot of sense. French Revolution and all that crap, the new secular world order thing that France was all about. That, of course, that included the metric system. Of course, that was. God, that's such a French thing. Anyway, neat little historical accuracy there. Unnecessary historical accuracy because it's an American cartoon from the 1960s of Snoopy and the Red Baron, but also, yeah, that's so French. Why didn't I know that? I should have known that, but I should have figured at least. But, oh man, metric system is so French, so post-revolution French. I love this because it actually ties in the C plot with the B plot. So, as far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty sure the Great Pumpkin thing, the Linus and Sally in the Great Pumpkin in the Pumpkin Patch, that's kind of the A plot because the name of the special. This is the B plot, the kids at trick or treating and at the party, and those two intersect a bunch because they keep stopping back at the Pumpkin Patch. But Snoopy with the weird C plot, which is sort of like I said, out of place. This Red Baron thing. A couple of places here. So here and then later in the Pumpkin Patch, that C plot just sort of weaves its way through A and B, and I think it does a good job of tying them together. And I did say, like I said earlier, I think that it screws with the pacing pretty bad, especially early on. But they at least interweave it in quite well, at least at this stage. So I actually really love that little segment there with which I think, I mean, probably goes on a little too long, but I really like the different thematic music, just directly altering Snoopy's mood, from a happy march to a somber lament to an upbeat still a march, I guess. Then back to again another very somber, another lament, I suppose you'd call it, with the trilled guitar and not guitar, the trilled piano keys, which almost replicates a guitar strum or something like that kind of thing, which I really appreciate that because it I mean, again, if this is the kind of thing that we want to think of in terms of educational, teaching kids how to interact with their world and stuff like that, then understanding that music can have emotional impact like this, and that's perfectly acceptable and that's perfectly normal, and that's what music is supposed to do, having that very quick, almost instantaneous effect on you. I think that's something that's a good thing to learn, and that's a good thing for kids, especially little kids, to pick up and figure out, because it's crucially important, and it's um, the hearing of music and the listening to music is, I think, part of early education that we often neglect. And this again, this goes back to Plato, at least to Plato, who thought that different modes of music had very strong emotional and even emotional connections, and even connections to virtue, the development of virtue, and that we neglect that. I think to our peril. I like that scene. Again, I think it goes on a little too long, but I like it for what it does, and for what it's showing, and how it shows it.
There he is! There he is! It's the great pumpkin! He's rising up out of the pumpkin patch!
No, no, it wasn't. I mean, we know this. Sally knows this. Linus doesn't. But now he's going to learn. He's going to realize that it was not the Great Pumpkin. And this should constitute another defeater. This should constitute another reason for him to reform his belief, especially if his reason for believing in the Great Pumpkin in the first place has anything to do with maybe having seen something that he thought was the Great Pumpkin. Because if just here, if he saw Snoopy, a beagle, rising out of the pumpkin patch, and misinterpreted that as the Great Pumpkin, that should give him a reason to question whether that might be what he saw last time instead of the Great Pumpkin. And so this does, I think, constitute another significant defeater that he is choosing to ignore rather than acknowledge and deal with.
Trick or treats come only once a year, and I miss it by sitting in a pumpkin patch with a blockhead. You owe me restitution!
In this special, as well as in the Peanuts Christmas special, Sally is just so incredibly entitled. You owe me restitution. I'll sue. In the Christmas special, if I recall, she has Charlie Brown write a letter to Santa, basically just asking for, like, demanding, which I don't know exactly what to make of that. I guess it's just a character trait. It's something that's consistently written, and it's I don't really know if it factors into much else. It's just a neat little consistent character trait.
If the Great Pumpkin comes, I'll still put in a good word for you. Good grief. I said if. I meant when he comes.
I'm doomed. One little slip like that can cause the Great Pumpkin to pass you by.
Okay, that's another one of these rationalizations that he puts forward. Another probably ad hoc, arbitrary rationalization, but still, this is his method for still disingenuously, but sort of mentally reconciling the lack of evidence, or even the various defeaters for his belief in the Great Pumpkin. That this is his way of reconciling those with his continued believing, because he wants to continue believing, even despite the various defeaters and such. And he has to do that somehow, right? We mentally hate cognitive dissonance. We don't like it. We don't want to live with it. So Linus needs to come up with a way of reconciling it in his mind, even if he's going to do it in a disingenuous, ad hoc, arbitrary way. And this is it. The pumpkin patch is not sincere enough. Because it's not sincere enough, the Great Pumpkin didn't show up. It's not because he doesn't exist, even though it is. It's because it's not sincere. Because it is. Right, Linus thinks that it's his fault, not the Great Pumpkin's fault, or not because the Great Pumpkin doesn't exist. It's because there's something wrong with him, and there's something wrong with the pumpkin patch, not with his belief. Now, again, this is, like I said, this is arbitrary. He could just as well go the other way with this. And, I mean, in part, I suppose it depends on why he believes this in the first place. Whew. Excuse me. It depends on why he believes this in the first place, because if he has a better reason for believing it, then these various reasons have shown up to deny it, then he might still be justified in believing it in some sense. But that's a heck of a stretch. It doesn't seem to me like he can possibly have that good of a reason for believing.
Well, another Halloween has come and gone.
Yes, Charlie Brown.
I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, too.
Stupid? What do you mean, stupid? Just wait till next year, Charlie Brown. You'll see. Next year at this same time, I'll find a pumpkin patch that is real sincere.
And see, and here we have, again, Linus persisting in his belief, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, despite all of the defeaters, despite everything. He's persisting in his belief because he's blaming the sincerity of the pumpkin patch, he's blaming his own sincerity, rather than being willing to consider the possibility that he was mistaken about his belief in the Great Pumpkin. And again, despite Charlie Brown saying that hey, we all make mistakes. Because Charlie Brown sure does make mistakes, but Linus here is just refusing to admit that possibility. And we see here, again, reflected in innocent children, but we see a tendency that we grown-ups tend to have with respect to the reformation of our beliefs. And I've talked about this as well, I think in the context of Pascal, Blaise Pascal and pragmatism, Pascal's wager, that I think it was the lecture on the Discourse on the Machine, where I point out that changing one's beliefs like this is really difficult, because it's a kind of ego death. Kind of death of the ego. It's a kind of admitting that you were fundamentally wrong about something and you had no good reason to think it, even though you thought you did. Right? And you had a really good reason for thinking that you did, or at least so you thought. And you wrapped up so much of your identity and so much of your behavior and so much of everything you're wrapped up in this belief. This is especially true for religious belief, but also for irreligious belief. That to change your mind about it is basically dying. Now, maybe it's not that big a deal. Not always. Certainly not for, kids. Right? But if you've dedicated your adult life to something, you're going to have a very, very hard time admitting you were wrong about it. And so it's this kind of persistence in obviously false belief, even belief that you have very good reason to believe is false, obvious even to you, not just obvious to anybody else. But persistence in a belief like this is, I think, attributable almost entirely to pride. That we are too proud of ourselves to admit when we were wrong, because it's a kind of dying to oneself. The kind of thing that we're supposed to do in Christ. And so maybe it's possible with a miracle, but I think for most people, we just can't do this sort of thing. We can't bring ourselves to admit that we had been wrong about everything forever. Especially if it's something so fundamental that it is ultimately being wrong about everything. Yeah, you in a lot of people just can't bring themselves to do that because it's an issue of pride. And just like Linus, he would have to admit that he wasn't just wrong about it now. He's not just wrong about it here. He wasn't just wrong about it this year. He's been wrong about this for years and years. And that all those trick-or-treats were missed for no reason. All those Halloween parties were missed for no reason. And that he wasted all this time sitting in a pumpkin patch for nothing. And that is a hell of a thing to admit. I mean, for a kid, especially, who this is a big portion of his life. So that's one more lesson that we've learned from the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. And so I hope we learned a good deal from this, and I hope I'm going to be able to put a lot of the footage here up onto YouTube, and that the copytism bots don't kill me for it. We'll see how much I can get up there, even if it is just my commentary with still screens. We'll survive it, and you'll certainly at least have a link to watch it below, and then follow along, watch it ahead of time, listen to my commentary, see what I have to say, see what you have to think, and I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments as well. So thank you so much for joining me on this. This has been very fun. I enjoy this special so very much, and I enjoy talking about it. And I enjoy overanalyzing children's cartoons in from a philosophical perspective, as you can tell. And so I hope you had as good a time as I did. Happy Halloween, everybody. I'll see you next time.